Victoria marched into the courtroom in her bespoke Armani suit, wearing the smile of a woman who had never known failure. She believed she was here to sign for ownership of my life. She thought that asset list was her ticket to stripping me bare, but she did not realize that in the world of digital forensics, she had just submitted a confession written in greed. As the bailiff read the first line, I knew she had already locked her own wrists. My name is Eleanor Whitby, and as I sat alone at the defendant's table, I felt less like a litigant and more like a specimen under glass. The table before me was a slab of scarred oak, etched with the nervous doodles of 1,000 desperate souls who had sat in this exact chair before me. I ran my thumb over a groove carved into the wood, feeling the history of anxiety that permeated the air of Oak Haven County Courthouse. I was 26 years old, dressed in a navy blue dress that I had bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and entirely unremarkable. It was the uniform of someone who had nothing left to lose, or perhaps someone who had nothing left to hide. To my right, the plaintiff's table was a fortress of expensive wool and silk. If I was an island of solitude, they were an invading army. Victoria Vance, the woman who had married my father 5 years ago and buried him 6 months ago, sat in the center of the formation. She was flanked by 4 attorneys from Sterling and Associates, a firm whose billing rates likely exceeded the annual budget of the entire courthouse maintenance staff. They moved with the synchronized precision of sharks in a tank, shuffling papers and whispering in low, confident tones that were designed to carry just far enough to be heard but not understood. Victoria was wearing black. It was a tasteful, understated black, the kind that screamed grief to the uninitiated but whispered money to anyone paying attention. Her posture was a masterclass in performative vulnerability. Her shoulders were slumped just enough to suggest the weight of the world, but her chin was held at an angle that caught the courtroom lighting perfectly. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, a prop she had likely selected with the same care she used to choose her divorce lawyers for her previous 2 marriages. The courtroom itself smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that always reminded me of elementary school detention. The air conditioning system hummed with a rhythmic, mechanical exhaustion, struggling to battle the humidity of the late spring morning. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the high, grime-streaked windows. It was a place where dreams went to die and where bureaucratic machinery ground human lives into paperwork. Judge Harris entered the room with the weary gait of a man who had heard every lie ever invented and was too tired to be surprised by new ones. He took his seat at the bench, his robe settling around him like a heavy shroud. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the docket, and then peered over the rim at the disparity between the 2 tables. On one side, a phalanx of legal might. On the other, a solitary young woman with hands folded in her lap. Civil case number 4492, the bailiff announced, his voice bored. Estate of Robert Whitby regarding the petition for emergency conservatorship and asset seizure. The lead attorney for Victoria stood up. He was a tall man with silver hair and a tan that could only be acquired on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He buttoned his jacket with a single, fluid motion and approached the bench. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. "My name is Arthur Sterling, representing Mrs. Victoria Vance, the grieving widow and concerned stepmother of the respondent, Miss Eleanor Whitby." I watched Victoria as he spoke. She did not look at him. She looked down at her hands, twisting the large diamond solitaire on her left ring finger. It was not her wedding ring. It was a ring my father had bought for my mother 20 years ago. Victoria had found it in the safe deposit box immediately after the funeral and had not taken it off since. She twisted it clockwise, then counterclockwise, a nervous tick that looked like anxiety but was actually a method of ensuring the diamond caught the light. "Your Honor." "Mr.?" Sterling continued, turning slightly to gesture toward me with an open, pitying hand. "We are here today with heavy hearts. This is not a step taken lightly. My client loves her stepdaughter deeply. However, given the erratic behavior Ms. Whitby has displayed since her father's passing. We believe she is no longer capable of managing the significant assets entrusted to her. We are petitioning for an immediate transfer of all liquid assets, real estate holdings, and intellectual property rights to Mrs. Vance for safekeeping until such a time as Miss Whitby can prove her mental stability. He paused for effect, letting the phrase mental stability hang in the thick air like a poisonous cloud. We have documentation, Sterling said, lowering his voice to a tone of confidential concern, of reckless spending, disappearance for weeks at a time without contact, and investments in projects that simply do not exist. We believe Ms. Whitby is suffering from a severe episode of grief-induced instability, perhaps even bipolar disorder, and is being preyed upon by scam artists. We are asking the court to intervene before the family legacy is squandered entirely. I sat perfectly still. I did not frown. I did not shake my head. I kept my breathing even, counting the seconds between his sentences. 1, 2, 3. Victoria lifted her head and looked at me. It was a look she had practiced in the mirror. I was sure of it. Her eyes were wide and shimmering with unshed tears. She furrowed her brow in a display of maternal worry, tilting her head slightly to the side. It was the look one gives to a wounded animal that one intends to euthanize. To the judge, it surely looked like heartbreak. To me, it looked like hunger. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to jump up and scream that she was a liar. She wanted the unstable girl to make a scene. I gave her nothing. I looked through her, focusing on the wood paneling on the wall behind her head. The judge shuffled the papers in front of him. These are serious allegations. Mr. Sterling, emergency conservatorship is a drastic measure. The situation is drastic, Your Honor, Sterling replied smoothly. We have reason to believe Ms. Whitby is on the verge of liquidating key assets to fund a non-existent venture. Time is of the essence. Victoria let out a small, audible sob. It was soft, just loud enough to reach the bench. She pressed the handkerchief to her mouth, her shoulders shaking delicately. It was a brilliant touch. Judge Harris rubbed his temples. He looked at the mountain of filings the plaintiff had submitted, binders of evidence that I knew contained nothing but fabricated invoices and twisted truths. Then he looked at my empty table. Ms. Whitby, the judge said, his voice gravelly. I see you are present. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice was calm, clear, and devoid of tremors. Do you have counsel present, or are we waiting for someone? Judge Harris asked, glancing at the empty chairs beside me. He clearly expected a lawyer to burst through the doors, apologizing for being late. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my dress. I do not have counsel, Your Honor. A ripple of movement went through the plaintiff's table. The junior associates exchanged glances. Mr. Sterling smirked, a tiny, fleeting expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. A pro se litigant, someone representing themselves, was usually the easiest kill in the legal jungle. In their eyes, I had just signed my own death warrant. They thought I was either too poor to afford a lawyer or too arrogant to hire one. They preferred the latter. It made the victory sweeter. You are proceeding pro se? The judge asked, his eyebrows raising slightly. Ms. Whitby, given the complexity of this estate and the serious nature of these allegations, I strongly advise you to seek legal representation. The court can grant a continuance of 48 hours for you to find an attorney. That will not be necessary, Your Honor, I said. I am prepared to proceed today. I understand the gravity of the situation, and I am fully capable of representing my own interests. Victoria let out a sharp breath, loud enough to be heard. She leaned toward Mr. Sterling and whispered something, shaking her head. I could read her lips perfectly. She's manic again. Mr. Sterling turned back to the judge, his face composing itself into a mask of professional patience. Your Honor, this refusal to seek counsel is simply further evidence of the respondent's lack of judgment. She does not understand the peril she is in. I understand perfectly. Mr. Sterling, I said, cutting him off before he could launch into another monologue. I turned my eyes to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff claims I am irresponsible. They claim I have mismanaged my inheritance. They claim I cannot be trusted with the truth. I am here to answer those claims directly, without a filter. The judge looked at me for a long moment. He was assessing me, looking for the wild eyes or the rapid speech patterns of the mentally ill. He found neither. He found a young woman standing straight, hands clasped, eyes clear. Very well, Judge Harris said with a sigh. The court notes that the respondent has waived her right to counsel and has chosen to represent herself. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with the presentation of your evidence. Mr. Sterling nodded, looking like a cat that had just been presented with a bowl of particularly rich cream. He sat down, and the team of lawyers began to arrange their binders. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who believed the game was already won. They were already thinking about their lunch reservations at the steakhouse down the street. They were thinking about the billable hours. I reached down to the floor beside my chair. I did not have a team of paralegals. I did not have binders of motions drafted by Ivy League graduates. I had a single object. I lifted my briefcase onto the table. It was an old leather briefcase, the color of cognac, battered and worn at the corners. It had belonged to my grandfather, a man who believed in hard work and precise bookkeeping. The brass latches clicked loudly in the quiet courtroom, a sharp, metallic sound that seemed to echo off the high ceiling. Click, click. Victoria watched the briefcase with narrowed eyes. She had never seen it before. To her, it looked like junk, a piece of trash that I had dragged in from a thrift store. She did not know what was inside. She assumed it was full of ramblings, scribbled journals, or perhaps the crazy drawings she had told the lawyers I made. She watched me open the lid. The leather creaked. I did not look at her. I looked at the contents of the case. Inside, neatly arranged, were a series of color-coded folders and a secure, encrypted hard drive. It was not a chaotic mess. It was an arsenal. This was not a defense I had prepared in a manic fever. This was a trap I had been building for 6 months. Every disappearance, every irresponsible purchase, every silence had been a calculated move to bring us to this exact moment, in this exact room. Before this exact judge, Victoria smoothed her skirt and leaned back, a small, victorious smile playing on her lips as she waited for her high-priced lawyer to dismantle me. She thought she was the hunter. She thought I was the prey. She did not know that the hunter often becomes the hunted when they step into a forest they do not understand. And Victoria Vance, with all her diamonds and her lawyers, had no idea she had just walked into a minefield. I am ready, Your Honor, I said softly, placing my hand on the first folder. But before we address the accusations of my instability, I believe the plaintiff has a list of assets she wishes to secure. I would like to address that list item by item. Mr. Sterling stood up, looking bored. We have the inventory prepared, Your Honor. It is a standard procedure. Good, I said, finally turning to look directly at Victoria. Her smile faltered just a fraction as our eyes locked. Let's read it. I want to make sure we don't miss a single penny. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, a sound that signaled the beginning of the slaughter. He did not look at me. To him, I was already a ghost, a problem to be solved with paperwork and a judge's signature. He turned his attention solely to the bench. Treating Judge Harris like a colleague, he was inviting to a private club. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice dropping an octave to convey a sense of grave responsibility. The petition for emergency asset conservatorship is not a request we make lightly. It is a rescue mission. The estate of Robert Whitby is vast, comprised of complex real estate holdings, equities, and liquid capital. It requires a steady hand, a sober mind, and a level of fiscal responsibility that the respondent, Ms. Whitby, has proven time and again she does not possess. He signaled to a junior associate, who promptly stood up and handed a thick, leather-bound binder to the bailiff to present to the judge. Another identical binder was placed on my table with a heavy thud. Exhibit A, Sterling announced, pacing slowly in front of the plaintiff's table. "These are credit card statements and bank withdrawals from the past 6 months, all authorized by Ms. Whitby. I would like to direct the court's attention to page 4. I opened the binder. I did not look at page 4. I knew what was there because I knew what they had fabricated, but I watched the judge. Judge Harris flipped the page, his eyes scanning the columns, his brow furrowed. "Your Honor will see a series of transactions dating back to February," Sterling said, his voice rising with theatrical incredulity. "February 14th, a charge of $12,000 at a boutique hotel in Cabo San Lucas. February 16th, $8,500 at a luxury handbag retailer in Miami. March 2nd, a cash withdrawal of $25,000 from a casino ATM in Las Vegas." The courtroom air seemed to grow heavier. The allegations were specific. They were painted in the broad strokes of a spoiled heiress parting away her father's legacy while his grave was still fresh. I was never in Cabo, I thought, my internal voice screaming while my face remained a mask of stone. On February 14th, I was sitting in a freezing storage unit in New Jersey, scanning boxes of my father's old tax returns under a battery-operated lamp because the power had been cut. On March 2nd, I was not in Las Vegas. I was meeting a forensic accountant in a diner in Philadelphia, paying him in cash I had saved from my own job so there would be no paper trail for Victoria to find. But Sterling was on a roll, and the truth was irrelevant to his narrative. "These are not the actions of a grieving daughter," Sterling continued, gesturing toward the ceiling as if appealing to God himself. "These are the actions of a young woman spiraling out of control, manic spending, impulsive travel, a complete disregard for the value of the dollar, and while she was purportedly jet-setting across the continent, she was neglecting the very real, very serious business of the Whitby estate." He turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Vance, could you please tell the court about Ms. Whitby's whereabouts during this period?" Victoria stood up slowly. She held the edge of the table as if she needed support to stay upright. She looked at me, her eyes swimming with that practiced, weaponized pity. "She vanished," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound shattered. "After the funeral, Eleanor just disappeared. I tried to call her. I sent emails. I even hired a private investigator to make sure she was safe. For 3 months, Your Honor, I did not know if my husband's daughter was dead or alive. I sat in that big empty house, terrified that the police would knock on the door." She sniffed, dabbing her nose. "I just wanted to help her. I knew she was hurting. Robert's death was hard on all of us. But to run away? To spend money we didn't have liquid access to? I was covering the estate taxes out of my own pocket while she was doing this." She gestured vaguely at the binder of lies. "I wasn't running," I said to myself. My hands clasped so tightly under the table that my knuckles were white. "I was hunting you." Judge Harris looked up from the binder, his expression darkening. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of judgment in his eyes. He saw a girl who abandoned her family to party. He saw the story they wanted him to see. "Ms. Whitby," the judge said, his voice stern, "do you deny these transactions?" I opened my mouth, but Sterling cut in before I could speak. "The records speak for themselves, Your Honor. They are bank certified, but the financial hemorrhage is only a symptom of the underlying pathology." Sterling walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper. He held it like it was a fragile artifact. "We have here a sworn affidavit from Dr. Julian Thorne, a highly respected clinical psychiatrist who treated Miss Whitby briefly following the death of her father. Dr. Thorne notes that Miss Whitby exhibited classic signs of bipolar II disorder, characterized by severe depressive lows followed by periods of hypomania, risky behavior, grandiosity, and financial indiscretion." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had met Dr. Thorne exactly once, for 15 minutes, at a grief counseling center. Victoria had insisted I visit. I had said nothing to him other than my name and that I missed my father. Now, apparently, that 15 minutes was enough for a diagnosis that would strip me of my rights. "Doctor," Thorne strongly recommends that Ms. Whitby be placed under a conservatorship for her own protection. Sterling read, emphasizing the words her own protection. He believes that without intervention, she poses a significant financial risk to herself and the estate. The trap was closing. They had painted a picture of a mentally unstable, spendthrift girl who needed a mommy to take care of the checkbook. It was a narrative that played into every stereotype of the wealthy. Troubled child. It was perfect. It was seamless. "We are asking," Sterling said, his voice booming now, moving in for the kill, "that the court grant Mrs. Victoria Vance full emergency asset conservatorship immediately. We ask that all bank accounts currently accessible by Ms. Whitby be frozen and transferred to a trust controlled by Mrs. Vance. We ask that Ms. Whitby be removed from any decision-making capacity regarding the Whitby properties. We do this not out of malice, Your Honor, but out of love. We want to save Eleanor from herself." Victoria nodded rapidly, burying her face in her hands as if the weight of her benevolence was too much to bear. The silence that followed was absolute. The air conditioning hummed. The bailiff shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Every eye in the room was on me. The junior lawyers were leaning forward, expecting an outburst. They expected the manic girl to scream, to cry, to throw the binder at the wall. That was what the script called for. That was what would seal the deal. Judge Harris stared at me. He was waiting. He was giving me a chance to unravel. "Ms. Whitby," he said, "you have heard the allegations. You have seen the evidence. The plaintiff is painting a very disturbing picture. If these records are accurate, the court is inclined to agree that you are not in a position to manage this estate." I sat there. I did not move. I did not blink. I let the silence stretch out, longer and longer, until it became uncomfortable. I let Victoria peek through her fingers to see why I wasn't screaming. I let Sterling frown, confused by my lack of hysteria. They wanted a fight. They wanted chaos. I gave them a void. In that silence, I saw Victoria lean over to Sterling. She whispered something, and for a split second, the mask slipped. A smile, sharp and predatory, ghosted across her lips. She thought I was paralyzed by fear. She thought I was crushed under the weight of their expensive lies. She nodded at the judge, a gesture that said, "See? She is catatonic. She is broken." The suffocation in the room was intense. It felt as if the walls were closing in, built of their lies and my apparent helplessness. To the casual observer, I was a defeated woman, a child out of her depth, about to be saved by the benevolent stepmother. Judge Harris leaned forward, his patience thinning. "Ms. Whitby, do you have anything to say? If you do not offer a substantial rebuttal to this evidence, I will have no choice but to grant the plaintiff's motion. I will sign the order for conservatorship before we leave for lunch." This was the precipice. One wrong word, one emotional crack, and it would be over. I had to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. I stood up. I moved slowly, deliberately, like I was moving underwater. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the cool wood. I looked at the judge, ignoring the binder of fake receipts, ignoring the affidavit from the lying doctor, ignoring the woman who had poisoned my father's memory. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but carrying to the back of the room without effort, "I will address every single one of these accusations. I will address the $12,000 in Cabo. I will address the 3 months of silence. I will address Dr. Thorne's 15-minute diagnosis." I paused, turning my head slowly to look at Victoria. She was still smiling, but the smile had frozen at the corners. "But the plaintiff has come here today with a specific goal," I continued, turning back to the judge. "They claim they want to protect the assets. They claim they want to secure the estate. If that is true, then the specific items they wish to secure must be identified beyond a shadow of a doubt." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, thin file. "I am not interested in debating my mental health with a lawyer who is paid $400 an hour to insult me," I said. "I am interested in the facts, And the facts start with what, exactly, Mrs. Vance is so desperate to get her hands on. Judge Harris narrowed his eyes. Ms. Whitby, are you refusing to answer the allegations of misconduct? I am delaying my answer, Your Honor, I said. I am asserting my right to understand the scope of this hostile takeover before I defend myself against it. If I am to be stripped of my property, I want to hear exactly what that property is. Read aloud, into the public record. I pointed a finger at the document resting on the clerk's desk. I want to hear the list, I said. I want to hear every account number, every address, and every asset she claims I am too crazy to own, and I want to hear it before I show you why she is the one who should be afraid. Sterling scoffed, standing up. Your Honor, this is a stalling tactic. The inventory is standard. It is attached to the motion. There is no need to waste the court's time reading it aloud. If it is standard, I shot back, keeping my eyes on the judge, then you should have no fear of it being read, unless, of course, there is something on that list you don't want the court to look at too closely. Judge Harris looked from me to Sterling, then to Victoria. He saw the sweat beading on Sterling's forehead. He saw the sudden rigidity in Victoria's posture. He was a judge who had seen everything, and he knew that when a lawyer tried to stop something from being read, it was usually the most important thing in the room. The court has time, Judge Harris said, sitting back in his chair. The objection is overruled. The respondent has a right to know the specifics of the seizure. He gestured to the bailiff. Read the list. The document Arthur Sterling held in his manicured hand was not merely a piece of paper. It was a manifesto of greed, bound in legal formatting and stapled with malice. He approached the bench with the reluctance of a man who was used to backroom deals. Not public dissections. He wanted this document stamped, filed, and buried in the archives before the ink was dry. He did not want it broadcast. This is the inventory of assets to be secured, Sterling said, sliding the document toward the clerk. It is a comprehensive list of the holdings Mrs. Vance believes are in immediate jeopardy due to the respondent's instability. We ask that it be entered into the record as Exhibit B. He turned to go back to his seat, assuming the matter was settled. Objection, I said. I did not shout. I did not stand. I simply spoke the word into the dead air of the courtroom. Sterling froze, half-turned. On what grounds? This is a standard procedure. On the grounds of transparency, I said, looking at Judge Harris. If the plaintiff intends to take control of my life, item by item, I believe the court, and the record, deserves to know exactly what those items are. I request that the bailiff read the inventory aloud. I want to confirm the accuracy of each asset publicly. If I am as mentally compromised as they say, surely I wouldn't be able to follow along, would I? Sterling bristled. Your Honor, this is absurd. It is a waste of the court's valuable time. The list is long. It contains sensitive financial data. Reading it aloud serves no purpose other than to delay the inevitable. Judge Harris looked at the thick document sitting on the clerk's desk. Then he looked at Victoria, whose eyes were darting nervously between her lawyer and the binder. Then he looked at me. He saw a young woman with a briefcase and a terrifying amount of calm. Transparency is never a waste of time in my courtroom, Mr. Sterling, the judge said. And given the severity of the request, total seizure of an estate, I am inclined to agree with the respondent. Let us be very clear about what we are talking about. The judge picked up the document and held it out to the bailiff. Deputy Miller, the judge said, please read the inventory. Start with the liquid assets and move to the holdings. Deputy Miller was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same gray stone as the courthouse itself. He was heavy-set, with a uniform that strained slightly at the buttons, and a face that had settled into a permanent expression of bureaucratic boredom. He had worked in this room for 20 years. He had seen murderers weep and billionaires beg. To him, this was just another Tuesday, another stack of paper to process before his lunch break sandwich. He walked over, took the document, and adjusted his reading glasses. He cleared his throat, a wet, rattling sound that echoed in the silence. Inventory of assets regarding the estate of Robert Whitby. Miller read, his voice a flat, monotone drone that stripped all emotion from the words. Section 1. Liquid assets and investment accounts. I reached into my leather briefcase. The sound of the latch clicking open seemed incredibly loud. Victoria watched me. She was leaning forward slightly. Her lips parted. She was not afraid yet. She was anticipating the thrill of hearing her prize list read out loud. It was like hearing her net worth increase in real time. She nodded slightly as Miller began the list, checking off the items in her mind against the mental shopping list she had been compiling since the day my father died. Item 1, Miller read, investment account held at First Horizon Bank, account number ending in 8821. That is the primary trading account, Sterling interjected helpfully, trying to regain control of the narrative. Significant funds are at risk there. I did not look up. I reached into the accordion file inside my briefcase. I bypassed the first tab. I bypassed the second. I pulled out a folder marked with a large, black number 1. I placed the folder on the table. It was thin, containing only 3 sheets of paper. I smoothed it flat with the palm of my hand. Victoria's eyes flickered to the folder. She frowned. She did not know what was in it, but the number 1 was too coincidental to be ignored. Miller continued, oblivious to the tension radiating from the plaintiff's table. Item 2, Miller droned. Intellectual property rights and majority shareholder status for Apex Logic. A virtual software development entity. Victoria sat up straighter. This was the big one, or so she thought. Apex Logic was a project my father had mentioned in his final months, a revolutionary piece of code that was supposed to change the way data was encrypted. Victoria knew nothing about code, but she knew the valuation was in the millions. She had been desperate to get her name on the deed to that company. She believed it was the crown jewel of the estate. I reached into my briefcase again. I pulled out a second folder. This one was marked with a bold number 2. I placed it directly on top of the first folder, aligning the edges with geometric precision. Sterling watched the stack grow. He leaned over to Victoria and whispered something. She shook her head, dismissing him. She was too focused on the list. She was winning. In her mind, the reading of the list was the victory lap. Item 3, Miller read, turning the page with a dry rustle. Commercial real estate holding located at South Industrial Park. Property address, 105 Westlake. A warehouse, Sterling added, unable to help himself. Currently being used, we believe, as a party venue for the respondent and her associates, further draining estate resources for maintenance and utilities. I pulled out folder number 3. This one was thicker. It hit the table with a heavier sound. Thud. I had them. I had let them speak. I had let them commit to the list. They had put it in writing. They had submitted it to the court. They had demanded, under penalty of perjury, that these assets belonged to the estate and needed protection. They had claimed ownership, and that was exactly what I needed them to do. Miller took a breath to read item 4. But I moved. I stood up. The motion was sudden enough that Deputy Miller stopped reading and looked up over his glasses. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the drone of the air conditioner. Sterling jumped up. Objection! The bailiff is reading. The respondent insisted on this reading, and now she is interrupting it? I am not interrupting the reading, I said calmly. I am accelerating the truth. I picked up the first folder, the one marked with the number 1. I held it up. It was a simple manila folder, harmless in appearance, but inside was a grenade with the pin pulled. The plaintiff has just sworn to this court that item 1, the account at First Horizon Bank ending in 8821, is a legitimate asset of the Robert Whitby estate, and that I am mismanaging it. I said, they have submitted this list as the foundation of their case for conservatorship. That is correct, Judge Harris said, looking at me with intense curiosity. What is your point, Ms. Whitby? My point, Your Honor, is that I have counter-evidence regarding item 1 that makes the rest of this list irrelevant, I said. I would like to submit into evidence the origin documents for the account ending in 8821. And I would like the court to see exactly who opened it. And when. Sterling laughed. It was a nervous, dry sound. Your Honor, this is procedural theatrics. Who opened the account doesn't matter. The money is there, and she is spending it. Oh, it matters. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to a temperature that froze the smile on his face. Because if you had done your due diligence instead of just billing your client for lunch, you would know that account 8821 is a ghost. I walked around the table. Approaching the bench, I did not look at Victoria, but I could feel her gaze burning into the side of my face. She was starting to realize that the folder in my hand was not a defense, it was an indictment. May I approach, Your Honor? I asked. Judge Harris nodded. You may. I handed the sealed envelope containing the contents of folder number 1 to the clerk, who stamped it and handed it up to the judge. The plaintiff claims I am unstable, I said, turning to face the room. They claim I need to be controlled, but they have just claimed ownership of a crime scene, and I think, before we read any further, the judge needs to know that item 1 is not an investment account. It is a trap. I returned to my seat and sat down. I placed my hand on folder number 2. Please, I said to the bailiff, who was looking at the judge for instruction. Don't let me stop you, but I think the judge will want to read what I just gave him before you get to item 4. The room went silent. Judge Harris opened the envelope. The sound of tearing paper was the only noise in the world. He pulled out the documents. He put on his reading glasses. Victoria stopped twisting her ring. She went very, very still. The air in the courtroom shifted. The smell of floor wax seemed to fade, replaced by the sharp, metallic scent of fear. The judge read the first page. Then he read it again. He looked up at Sterling, and the look on his face was no longer one of fatigue. It was the look of a man who had just realized there was a bomb under his chair. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. You might want to sit down. The trap had snapped. The jaws were closed. And now, all I had to do was tighten the screws. Judge Harris adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching the dull fluorescent light of the courtroom as he leaned over the documents I had just submitted. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the plaintiff's lungs. Arthur Sterling stood near the bench, his hand hovering near his tie, his confidence evaporating with every second the judge spent reading. Ms. Whitby, Judge Harris said, his voice level but carrying a new weight. You stated that this account, the one ending in 8821, is a ghost. Explain that term to the court, and explain these discrepancies. I stood up, leaving the safe harbor of my table. I walked toward the easel that had been set up for the plaintiff's use, a blank canvas they had intended to use to chart my descent into madness. I picked up a marker. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. A ghost account is a financial vessel created using real identity points mixed with synthetic data. It is designed to look legitimate to a casual observer, or even a basic credit check, but under forensic scrutiny, it falls apart. I turned to the room. Victoria was staring at me, her eyes hard and unblinking, like a doll's eyes. She was trying to figure out how much I knew. She was about to find out that I knew everything. The plaintiff claims I opened this account at First Horizon Bank to speculate on high-risk stocks, I continued, pacing slowly. They claim I drained estate funds into it, but if you look at Exhibit C, the document I just handed you, you will see the account creation log provided by the bank's internal security division. I pointed to the paper in the judge's hand. Line 4, I said. The account was opened online using my social security number. That is correct. It uses my full legal name. That is also correct. But look at the date of birth entered during the application process. Judge Harris ran his finger down the page. The date of birth listed is January 1st, 1990. I was born in 1999, Your Honor. I said, a 9-year difference, a simple typo, one might argue. But banks use algorithmic verification. If the Social Security number does not match the birth date on file with the credit bureaus, the application is flagged for manual review. Unless, I paused, unless the applicant uses a bypass code reserved for high net worth clients who are pre-approved by a senior banker, I said. This account was forced through the system using an override code. And who has the authority to authorize such an override at First Horizon Bank? The bank manager, Mr. Stephen Vance, Victoria's brother. Victoria flinched. It was small, just a twitch of her shoulder, but it was there. Sterling shot a look at her, a look of genuine alarm. He had not known about the brother. But the data entry error is the least of the problems, I went on. The most damning piece of evidence is the timestamp. Look at the date and time of the account creation. Judge Harris read aloud. October 12th, 3 years ago, 3:14 in the afternoon. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another document. This one stamped with the logo of St. Jude's Medical Center. October 12th, 3 years ago, I repeated. At 3:14 in the afternoon, I was not sitting at a computer. I was not investing in stocks. I was on an operating table in operating room 4. I held up the medical record. I suffered a ruptured appendix that morning, I said, my voice clinical and detached. According to the anesthesia log, which is page 2 of that packet, I was induced under general anesthesia at 2:30 in the afternoon and did not wake up in the recovery room until 6:45 that evening. I was unconscious, intubated, and completely incapacitated at the exact moment this account was opened. I walked over and placed the medical record on the judge's bench. Unless the plaintiff is suggesting I have the ability to telepathically complete a 2-factor authentication process while my abdomen is being stapled shut, I said. I did not open this account. Sterling stepped forward, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Objection, Your Honor. This is circumstantial. Perhaps Ms. Whitby gave her information to a friend or a broker to open the account on her behalf. The fact that she was in surgery does not prove she did not authorize the creation of the account. A fair point. Mr. Sterling, I said, turning to him. If I authorized someone, there would be a record of communication, a text, an email, a power of attorney, but there is none. However, there is a record of who was sitting at the keyboard. I turned back to the easel and wrote 2 letters. IP. Every device that connects to the internet leaves a fingerprint, I said, an IP address. When account 8821 was created, the user logged in from a specific location. I subpoenaed the server logs from First Horizon's internet service provider. I pulled a 3rd document from my file. This one was dense with rows of numbers and technical jargon. The IP address used to access the bank's portal at 3:14 that afternoon was 192.168.10.4. I recited, I ran a trace on that address. It does not belong to a public library. It does not belong to a Starbucks. And it certainly does not belong to me. I looked directly at Victoria. That IP address is registered to a private static server, I said. Specifically, the internal secure server of the Vance Charity Foundation, the nonprofit organization that Mrs. Vance has run for the last decade. The courtroom murmured. A static IP address was hard evidence. It meant the computer was physically connected to a specific network. Sterling was sweating now. He wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief. Your Honor, the Vance Foundation has dozens of employees. Anyone could have used the Wi-Fi. It proves nothing about my client's involvement. It could be a rogue employee. It could be a clerical error. It could be Ms. Whitby herself visiting the office. I was in the hospital. Mr. Sterling, I reminded him. Remember the surgery? Well, maybe you gave your password to someone at the foundation, Sterling stammered, grasping at straws. I thought you might say that, I said. Which is why I didn't stop at the IP address. I dropped the final hammer. An IP address tells you where the house is, I said, but a MAC address tells you which device knocked on the door. A media access control address is a unique identifier hardwired into the network card of a computer. It is the digital fingerprint of the machine itself. I held up a report from a digital forensics firm. The device that opened the account has the MAC address ending in F4. B2, I said. I cross-referenced this with the device registry for the Vance Foundation's IT department, which is technically public record due to their tax-exempt status filing last year. I paused for effect, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. The device with that MAC address is listed as a Gold Edition MacBook Pro, assigned specifically to the executive director. I pointed at Victoria. Mrs. Victoria Vance. Victoria's hand went to her throat. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical blow. The layer of foundation she wore, usually so perfect, now stood out starkly against her pale skin. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at Sterling, begging him to do something, to say something, but Sterling was staring at the floor, realizing he had been handed a poisoned chalice. So, I said, summarizing for the judge, we have an account opened in my name, with incorrect data, while I was in a coma, from a computer belonging to the woman who is currently asking the court to give her control of my finances because I am irresponsible. Judge Harris looked at Victoria. His expression had shifted from skepticism to something much colder. It was the look of a man who realized his court was being used as a weapon. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, do you have an explanation for why your client's personal laptop was used to open an account in the respondent's name? I am not a technical expert, Your Honor, Sterling stuttered. I would need to consult with an IT specialist. This could be spoofing. Hackers can spoof MAC addresses. Hackers don't spoof addresses to open accounts and then deposit money into them, I interjected. And that brings me to the money. I walked back to my table and picked up the transaction history for the ghost account. Mr. Sterling claimed this account showed reckless spending, I said. He talked about Cabo. He talked about handbags. But if you look at the actual transaction lines, there are no payments to hotels. There are no payments to Gucci or Prada. I held the statement up for the judge to see. The inflows are consistent, I explained. Deposits of $9,000, $9,500, $9,900, all just under the $10,000 reporting threshold for the IRS. They come from anonymous donors labeled as charitable contributions. I flipped the page. And the outflows? They don't go to merchants. They go out via wire transfer, usually within 24 hours of the deposit, to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Consulting. I looked at the judge. This isn't a spending account. Your Honor, it's a laundry machine. Someone was using my identity to wash donations meant for the charity and funnel them offshore, and they needed a scapegoat in case the IRS ever came looking. Who better than the unstable stepdaughter? The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't just defending myself against a conservatorship anymore. I was accusing a pillar of the community of felony embezzlement and money laundering. Victoria let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. That's a lie, she shrieked, her composure shattering. He manipulated the data. He's a computer genius. He did this to frame me. Mrs. Vance, sit down, Judge Harris barked, slamming his gavel. He's lying, Victoria cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I never touched that account. I don't even know how to use online banking. Then how did you know to list it as item 1 on your inventory? I asked quietly. Victoria froze. Her mouth snapped shut. If you didn't know it existed, I said, and if I was hiding it from you, how did it end up at the very top of the list of assets you wanted to seize today? She had no answer. There was no answer. Judge Harris looked at the court reporter. Let the record reflect, he said, his voice tight with anger, that the court notes a significant contradiction regarding the origin and control of the asset listed as item 1. Let the record further reflect that the plaintiff's counsel is unable to explain the digital forensic evidence linking the plaintiff to the creation of said account. He turned his gaze to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, you are treading on very thin ice. If I find that you knowingly submitted fraudulent evidence to this court, you will be facing a bar hearing before the sun goes down. I assure you. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice trembling. I relied on the information provided by my client. I had no knowledge of these technical details. He stepped away from Victoria. Putting a physical distance between them, it was a subtle move, but in the legal world, it was a declaration of abandonment. He was cutting her loose to save himself. Move to item 3, the judge ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. I want to hear about this warehouse. The atmosphere in the room had flipped. 10 minutes ago, I was a victim. Now, I was the prosecutor, and Victoria Vance, the grieving widow in the Armani suit, was beginning to look very much like a criminal defendant. Deputy Miller did not look at the chaos that had just unfolded regarding the bank account. He was a creature of procedure, and the procedure demanded he read the next line. He licked his thumb, turned the page of the inventory list, and spoke into the heavy silence. Item 3, Miller announced. Commercial real estate holding located at South Industrial Park. Property address, 105 Westlake Avenue. The address hung in the air. To the uninitiated, it sounded innocuous, perhaps a boring office building or a strip mall. But to Victoria Vance, it was clearly a narrative anchor. She seized upon it instantly, desperate to pivot away from the disaster of the ghost account. She needed to drag the court back to the story of my moral failings and away from her digital fingerprints. This property, Victoria interrupted, her voice gaining a shrill edge that had not been there an hour ago. This is the heart of the problem. Your Honor, this building, my husband bought it with the intention of developing a community center, but after he died, Eleanor took it over. She gestured at me with a trembling hand, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light. She turned it into a clubhouse, Victoria said, searching for a word that sounded sufficiently sordid. A place for her and her friends to hide away from the world. We have reports of loud music, all-night gatherings, and God knows what kind of substance abuse. It is a drain on the estate's finances, costing thousands of dollars a month in maintenance for a place that is essentially a party den for delinquent heirs. She looked at the judge, pleading with her eyes. I am trying to sell it, Your Honor, to stop the bleeding, but she refuses to sign the papers. She is holding on to it out of spite, using her father's legacy as a playground. It was a good story. It fit the profile she had built. The wild, ungrateful daughter partying in a warehouse while the stepmother tried to balance the books. I stood up slowly. I picked up folder number 3. It was heavy, not with paper, but with glossy photographs. A playground, I repeated, my voice flat. A party den. Is that your testimony, Mrs. Vance, that I'm currently hosting lavish parties at 105 Westlake Avenue? Yes, Victoria snapped. My private investigator has seen the cars coming and going. We know what you're doing in there. Then your investigator must have excellent night vision, I said. And a very active imagination. I walked to the bench and handed the first photograph to Judge Harris. Then I walked to the easel and taped a large, blown-up copy of the same image for the room to see. The photo did not show a loft. It did not show a club. It showed a ruin. 105 Westlake Avenue was a skeletal husk of a building. The roof had collapsed inward, leaving the interior exposed to the sky. The windows were not just broken, they were gone, leaving jagged, tooth-like gaps in the brickwork. Weeds as tall as a man choked the entrance. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, bearing a faded sign that read, Danger, Structural Hazard, Condemned. This photo was taken yesterday morning, I said. As you can see, the party den is currently hosting a thriving community of pigeons and perhaps a few brave rats. There is no floor on the second level. There is no electricity. The city condemned this structure 4 years ago due to asbestos contamination. I turned to Victoria. She was staring at the photo, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She had never been there. She had only seen the address on the deeds. She had assumed it was a functional building. So, I continued, pacing back to my table to retrieve more documents. If I am hosting all-night parties here, Mrs. Vance, I must be doing it in complete darkness, wearing a hazmat suit, and hovering 3 feet above the ground where the floorboards used to be. Judge Harris looked at the photo, then at Victoria. Mrs. Vance, you stated you have reports of activity here. You stated you are paying maintenance costs. The paperwork says, Victoria stammered. The bills, I signed the checks. Ah, yes, the bills, I said. Let's talk about those checks you sign. I pulled a spreadsheet from folder number 3. According to the estate's tax filings, which Mrs. Vance signed under penalty of perjury 2 weeks ago, I said, holding up the tax return. This pile of rubble is a bustling hub of commerce. The estate claimed deductions for facility management, totaling $240,000 last year. It claimed expenses for security personnel totaling $150,000. I looked at the photo of the abandoned ruin. That is a lot of money to guard a pile of asbestos, don't you think? I flipped the page. But it gets better. The tax return also lists capital equipment imports delivered to this address. High-end servers, industrial cooling units, specialized manufacturing robots, total value, $4.2 million. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I went to the site. I walked through the hole in the fence. I looked for the $4 million worth of robots. Do you know what I found? I held up a plastic bag containing a rusted bolt and a piece of pigeon feather. I placed the bag on the defense table. There are no robots. There are no servers. There is no security guard. This building is a black hole. But on the paper, Victoria Vance controls? It is a corporation. I pulled out a business license. This is the operating license for the entity supposedly running out of this location, I said. It is registered in my name, Eleanor Whitby, CEO. Sterling jumped up. He saw an opening. Aha! So she admits it. She is the CEO. If there is fraud, she is the one committing it. I was waiting for you to say that, I said. I walked over to the bailiff and asked to borrow his pen. I took a piece of blank paper and signed my name. Eleanor Whitby. My signature is distinctive. I loop the L, and I cross the T with a sharp, upward strike. This is my signature, I said, handing the paper to the judge. Now, please look at the signature on the business license filed with the state. Judge Harris compared the two. They look remarkably similar, the judge said, frowning. Almost identical. Almost, I corrected, but not quite human. I pulled out a transparent overlay, a sheet of plastic with my signature printed on it. I placed it over the business license. It matched perfectly. Then I pulled out a second document, a lease agreement for the warehouse. I placed the overlay on that too. Perfect match. Then a third document. Perfect match. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice, I explained. There are always microscopic variations in pressure, angle, and spacing. But these are mathematically identical, to the pixel. I looked at Sterling. This is an auto pen signature, I said. A machine used by politicians and celebrities to mass sign fan mail. Or in this case, used by an executor to sign her stepdaughter's name to fraudulent business documents without her knowledge. And where is this auto pen machine kept? I asked rhetorically. I believe if we were to search the study of the Vance estate, we would find it sitting right next to the computer that opened the ghost bank account. Sterling looked like he wanted to vanish. He was a lawyer who specialized in divorces and estate disputes, not federal tax fraud and forgery. He realized he was standing in the blast radius of a felony indictment. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice tight. These are complex allegations, technical documents, signatures. We need time to have our own experts analyze this. I move for a recess, a continuance of 7 days to review the respondent's evidence. He was looking for an escape hatch. He wanted to get Victoria out of that room, into a conference room, and figure out who he needed to bribe or blame to make this go away. Judge Harris looked at the photo of the ruin. He looked at the auto pen signature. He looked at the tax return claiming millions in phantom equipment. Denied, Judge Harris said. The word cracked like a whip. But Your Honor, Sterling protested. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, leaning forward, his eyes cold. We are not going to recess, so you can shred documents. We are not going to recess, so your client can remember new facts. You filed an emergency petition claiming this young woman was a danger to the estate. You demanded an immediate hearing. Well, you have it. We are going to finish this list today. If we have to stay here until midnight, we are finishing this list. He turned to me. Continue. Ms. Whitby, you mentioned expenses. If this building is abandoned, where's the money for the rent and the security actually going? Excellent question, Your Honor, I said. I walked back to the easel and flipped to a new page. I drew a simple diagram, a box labeled My Trust Fund, an arrow pointing to a box labeled 105 Westlake, and then an arrow pointing away from Westlake to a third box. The money is automatically deducted from my trust fund every month, I explained. $35,000 for rent, $12,000 for utilities. Mind you, for a building that has no wires, I held up the utility records from the city. Water usage, 0. Electric usage, 0. Gas usage, 0. For 5 years. Yet, every month, a check for utilities and services is cut from my inheritance. So the money leaves my account, I said. Tapping the board. It goes to the company at the warehouse, but since the warehouse is full of pigeons, the money doesn't stay there. It is immediately invoiced out as consulting fees to a parent holding company. I wrote the name of the holding company on the board. V Victory Corp. V Victory Corp, I read aloud. Incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. Directors listed. Anonymous proxy. I turned to look at Victoria. She was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were blue. Subtlety was never your strong suit, was it, Victoria? I asked softly. Victory. Did you think no one would notice? Or did you just think you were untouchable? It's a coincidence, Victoria cried out, her voice cracking. Victory is a common word. It has nothing to do with me. Is that so? I asked. Then why is the billing address for V Victory Corps the same post office box in Georgetown that sends you your monthly subscription to Architectural Digest? I held up the magazine wrapper I had fished out of her recycling bin 4 months ago. It was stained with coffee, but the address label was clear. Mrs. Victoria Vance, P.O. Box 492, Georgetown, Cayman Islands. I held up the corporate registration for V Victory Corp. Registered agent address, P.O. Box 492, Georgetown, Cayman Islands. You are paying yourself rent for a building that doesn't exist, I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room with the magnitude of the theft. You are buying phantom robots from yourself. You are hiring ghost security guards from yourself. And you are using my money, the money my father left me, to do it. I turned back to the judge. She isn't here to save the estate from me, Your Honor. She is here to get the legal authority to hide the fact that she has already hollowed it out. She needs the conservatorship because the audit is coming. And if she controls me, she controls the audit. She can sign off on her own fraud. Judge Harris stared at the magazine wrapper. Then he stared at Victoria. The silence was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice incredibly soft, which was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. Does your firm represent V Victory Corp? No, Sterling whispered. No, Your Honor. We represent the domestic estate. We knew nothing of offshore holdings. Then it seems your client has been busy, the judge said. Very busy. He looked at Deputy Miller. Read the next item, the judge ordered. I want to see what else Mrs. Vance has been stealing. Deputy Miller looked at the next item on the list with a furrowed brow. He adjusted his glasses, squinting as if he hoped the words might rearrange themselves into something less ridiculous, but the ink remained stubborn. Item 4, he read. his voice echoing in the stunned silence left by the warehouse revelation. Collection of 3 vintage Ferrari automobiles, specifically a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB, and a 1984 Ferrari 288 GTO. The total value of such a collection would be astronomical. We were talking about tens of millions of dollars. Arthur Sterling stood up. He moved with less bounce in his step now. He looked like a man walking across a frozen lake, waiting for the ice to crack. But he had a script, and he was determined to stick to it, even if the stage was burning down around him. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice straining for authority. "This is the most egregious example of the respondent's flight from reality. Ms. Whitby drained the estate's liquid cash reserves to purchase these vehicles. She has hidden them. We believe they are currently stored in a private facility to conceal them from the probate inventory. She is treating the family fortune like her personal toy chest." Victoria nodded vigorously. She had recovered slightly from the warehouse disaster, clinging to the hope that the cars would be her salvation. After all, she had the bills of sale. She had the title transfers. They were beautiful, official-looking documents with gold seals. "She doesn't even drive them," Victoria added, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. "She just bought them to hoard the money. It is sickness, Your Honor, pure greed." I sat at my table, and for the first time since I had entered the courthouse, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was not a smile of warmth or amusement. It was the sharp, cold smile of a surgeon who has just found the tumor and knows exactly how to cut it out. "Your Honor," I said, remaining seated for a moment to let the silence amplify my words. "I have a confession to make." Sterling's head snapped up. Hope flared in his eyes. Was I finally breaking? Was I admitting to the purchase? "I do not know how to drive a manual transmission," I said. The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "I cannot drive a stick shift. I never learned. My father tried to teach me in his old Ford pickup when I was 16, but I stripped the gears and we gave up. So, the idea that I would secretly purchase 3 of the most difficult-to-drive analog sports cars in history is, frankly, comedic." "That is irrelevant," Sterling snapped, though his hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. "You bought them as investments, as hard assets to hide wealth. Whether you can drive them is beside the point." "Is it?" I asked. "I suppose you are right. A thief doesn't need to know how to drive the getaway car if she plans to ship it overseas. But there is a bigger problem with these cars. Mr. Sterling, a much bigger problem." I picked up folder number 4. "The problem is not that I can't drive them," I said. "The problem is that these cars do not exist, at least, not in this country." I walked to the easel. I pulled out a new document, this one bearing the heavy, intimidating crest of the United States Customs and Border Protection Agency. "If I had imported 3 Ferraris worth $40 million, I said, "there would be a customs declaration, there would be import duties, there would be Department of Transportation safety waivers, there would be a paper trail a mile long at the port of Newark or the port of Los Angeles." I slapped the document onto the easel. "This is a negative search result from the CBP database," I declared. I ran the vehicle identification numbers listed in Victoria's inventory, the VINs she provided to the court, according to the United States government. No vehicles with these VINs have entered the United States in the last 50 years. Victoria made a noise in her throat, a strangled sort of squeak. "But," I continued, turning to look at her, "that doesn't mean the cars aren't real. Oh, the cars are very real. They just aren't mine." I pulled out a report from the Italian Carabinieri, the National Gendarmerie of Italy. It was translated into English and certified by an international notary. I ran the VINs through the Europol database, I said. "It turns out, these specific Ferraris are quite famous. They are currently sitting in a police impound lot in Naples." I held up a photo of the cars. They were covered in dust, sitting behind yellow police tape. They were seized in 2019 as part of a massive tax evasion case against a mafia syndicate known as the Camorra, I explained. They have been frozen assets of the Italian state for 7 years, unless I somehow broke into a maximum security Italian police compound, stole 3 cars, floated them across the Atlantic on a raft, and hid them in New Jersey without customs noticing. Mrs. Vance is lying. Judge Harris looked at the photo of the dusty, impounded Ferraris. Then he looked at the glossy bill of sale Victoria had submitted. Mrs. Vance, the judge said. His voice was no longer impatient. It was dangerous. You submitted a bill of sale for these vehicles, dated 3 months ago. Who sold you these cars? Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Sterling. Sterling looked at the ceiling, as if praying for a meteor to strike the courthouse and end his misery. I can answer that, I said. I pulled out a copy of the bill of sale Victoria had provided. The seller is listed as Exclusive Euro Imports, LLC, I read. A very fancy name, but if you look at the incorporation papers for Exclusive Euro Imports, you will find it was registered 4 months ago. I paused. And if you look at the registered agent, I said, it is a man named Vincent Moretti. I walked back to my table and picked up a thick stack of paper. It was a printout of text messages. Vincent Moretti, I repeated. Or, as he is listed in Victoria's personal cell phone contacts, Cousin Vinny. Victoria stood up. That's private. You can't have my contacts. Actually, I can, I said coolly. During the discovery phase of the probate hearing last month, the one you didn't attend because you were too grief-stricken to leave your spa treatment in Aspen, my lawyer served a subpoena for your digital correspondence regarding estate expenditures. You ignored it, but your service provider didn't. I held up the transcripts. These are text messages between you and Cousin Vinny, I said. Dated January 15th. Let's read them, shall we? I started reading, mimicking Victoria's frantic tone. Victoria, the auditors are coming. I have a $3 million hole in the construction fund. I need to plug it. I switched to a deeper, rougher voice for Vinny. Vinny, I can get you paper. You want art? You want jewelry? Victoria. No. Cars. Make it look like Eleanor bought them. Something expensive. Something that explains where the cash went. Vinny. I got a list of VINs from an old bust in Italy. No one checks that stuff. I'll write you up a receipt. 5% fee. Victoria. Do it. Backdate it to November, and make sure the signature looks shaky. She was supposed to be drunk when she bought them. The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. It was the sound of a reputation dying. She bought paper cars, I said to the judge, dropping the transcript onto the defense table. She stole $3 million from the family company's construction budget. She needed to explain where the money went before the annual audit. So she paid her cousin to create fake invoices for cars that are currently gathering dust in Italy. Then she blamed me for buying them so she could claim I was wasting the money she had actually stolen. It was a classic money laundering technique. Clumsy and desperate, it was the work of an amateur who thought she was smarter than the system. Judge Harris slowly took off his glasses. He placed them on the bench. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. When he looked up, his face was hard. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, I am going to ask you a question, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Did you know the provenance of these vehicles? No, Sterling whispered. No, Your Honor, I swear, I saw the bills of sale. They looked authentic. I had no idea. You had no idea, the judge repeated, dripping with skepticism. You represent a client who is claiming to own cars that are in the custody of the Italian government, and you didn't run a VIN check? It was a rush, Your Honor. The emergency petition. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, turning his gaze to Victoria. Stand up. Victoria remained seated. She was staring at the text message transcript on the table, her eyes wide with horror. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at the evidence of her own conspiracy. Mrs. Vance, the judge barked. Victoria jumped to her feet. She was shaking now, visibly shaking. The Armani suit no longer looked like armor. It looked like a costume she had put on to play a part she didn't understand. "He told me it was safe," Victoria stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the empty air, presumably at Cousin Vinny. "He told me no one would check the VINs. He said they were clean." "He lied," I said. "And so did you." "You hacked me!" Victoria screamed suddenly. Her voice cracking into a shrill shriek, she pointed at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You little witch! You hacked my phone! That's illegal! You can't use that! It's inadmissible!" The courtroom gasped. I looked at the judge. I didn't need to say a word. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Harris said, his voice deadly calm. "Did you just admit that these text messages are authentic?" Victoria froze. Her hand, still pointing at me, slowly lowered. She realized what she had done. By claiming I had hacked her to get them, she had confirmed they were real. She had confirmed she wrote them. Victoria whispered. I didn't. You just claimed a violation of privacy regarding the source of the messages," the judge noted, "which implies the messages themselves are yours. You have just authenticated the evidence against yourself." He turned to the court reporter. "Strike the plaintiff's objection. The text messages are admitted into evidence as a party admission." Sterling sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. The civil case was dead. The criminal case was just being born. "This is not just perjury," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. "This is wire fraud. This is money laundering. And since she used the United States mail to send the check to her cousin, it is also mail fraud. That is 3 federal felonies, Your Honor. And we haven't even finished the list." Judge Harris looked at the inventory list. He looked at the next item. He looked at me. There was a glimmer of something in his eyes now. It wasn't just respect. It was anticipation. He wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. "Deputy Miller," the judge said, "read the next item." "But, Your Honor," Sterling moaned, his voice muffled by his hands. "Please, can we stop? I need to advise my client." "You can advise your client when I am done with her," Judge Harris snapped. "Read the item, Deputy." I stood ready. The cars were just the getaway vehicle. The next item was the destination, and I had the map. Deputy Miller cleared his throat. The sound was dry and scratchy, like sandpaper on wood. He looked down at the list, his eyes weary behind his spectacles. The courtroom was still vibrating with the revelation of the fake Ferraris, but the inventory list was a relentless machine, and it demanded to be read. "Section 5, Miller announced, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "Equity holdings and venture capital investments. Item 1, 80% controlling interest in BioLife Solutions, a private pharmaceutical research entity." "BioLife Solutions," Arthur Sterling repeated. He was sitting now, slumped slightly in his chair. No longer the strutting peacock of the morning, but habit was a powerful thing, and he tried to inject a note of legitimacy into the name. A biotech startup, high risk, high reward. Mrs. Vance has been prudent in diversifying the portfolio. I stood up. I did not need to rush anymore. The momentum was entirely on my side. I walked over to my briefcase and pulled out folder number 5. It was the thickest folder yet. "Prudent is one word for it," I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "Although I think creative is perhaps more accurate. BioLife Solutions. It sounds impressive, doesn't it? It sounds like laboratories with white floors and scientists looking into microscopes." I walked to the easel. I flipped past the photo of the impounded Ferraris and taped up a new image. It was a Google Street View printout. "This is the registered corporate headquarters of BioLife Solutions," I said, "located at 402 East Elm Street in Dover, Delaware." The image did not show a glass and steel laboratory. It showed a strip mall. To the left was a laundromat called Suds and Duds. To the right was a check-cashing store with bars on the windows. In the middle was a narrow storefront with a sign that read, Postal Plus, mailbox rentals, and notary services. BioLife Solutions is Box 412, I said, pointing to the door of the mailbox rental shop. It is a drawer, a metal drawer, 6 inches wide and 6 inches tall. That is where 80% of my family's venture capital fund is currently living. Victoria made a noise, a sharp intake of breath, but she did not speak. She was staring at the table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly that her fingernails were turning white. Now, I continued, having a registered agent at a mailbox service is not illegal. Many companies do it, but most companies that receive $200,000 a month in research and development grants usually have, at the very least, a beaker. I walked back to my table and picked up a large diagram I had prepared. It was a flowchart, color-coded in red and black. I placed it on the easel next to the photo of the laundromat. This, Your Honor, is the circulatory system of the fraud, I said. I pointed to the box at the top, labeled Robert Whitby Estate Trust. The money starts here, I explained. Legitimate funds, my father's life work, every month. Mrs. Vance authorizes a transfer. She labels it Capital Call for BioLife Investment. It looks official on the bank statements. I trace the red line down to the next box. The money then moves to the account we discussed earlier, I said. The ghost account ending in 8821, the one opened with my stolen identity. This is the mixing bowl. The estate money is mixed with the anonymous donations from the charity fraud I exposed in Part 4. It all swirls together here to lose its scent. I looked at Sterling. He was staring at the chart with a look of professional horror. He understood flowcharts. He knew exactly what he was looking at. From the ghost account, I continued, tracing the line further down. The money is wired to BioLife Solutions, but since BioLife Solutions is just a mailbox in Delaware, the money doesn't stay there. It bounces. It sits in a holding account for exactly 24 hours. I pointed to the timestamp on the transfer logs I had attached to the chart. At 9 in the morning, out at 9 the next morning, like clockwork, every single time. And where does it go? Judge Harris asked. He was leaning forward now, his elbows on the bench, his chin resting on his clasped hands. He was no longer looking at the papers. He was looking at the crime. That, I said, was the hardest part to find, because from Delaware, the money goes dark. It goes into the international banking system, shielded by shell companies and privacy laws. I paused, letting the tension build. But Mrs. Vance made a mistake, I said softly. She got greedy. She wanted to access the cash, and to access the cash, she needed a debit card. I pulled out a small, grainy photograph. It looked like it had been taken from a security camera. This is an ATM surveillance photo from a bank in Miami, taken 6 weeks ago, I said. That is Mrs. Vance. She is wearing sunglasses and a scarf, but that is clearly her, and that, I pointed to the purse on her arm, is a limited edition Birkin bag that she posted on her Instagram the same day. I handed the photo to the judge. She is using a platinum debit card to withdraw the maximum daily limit in cash, I said. I ran a trace on the card number visible in the high-resolution version of this image. The card was issued by First Cayman Bank. I walked back to the easel and drew a final line, a thick black arrow pointing to the bottom of the chart. The money flows from the estate, through the ghost account, through the BioLife mailbox, and lands here, I said. Account number 7734-C at First Cayman Bank. I turned to Victoria. And do you know whose name is on that account? Victoria? She did not answer. She was trembling, a fine vibration that seemed to shake her entire frame. I do, I said, because last month you applied for a mortgage on a vacation home in Tuscany, and on the mortgage application, you listed all your assets to prove you were good for the loan. You listed account 7734-C. I slapped the mortgage application onto the table. You listed it as personal savings, I said. Value, $12 million. The number hung in the air. $12 million. Judge Harris looked at the mortgage application. He looked at the flowchart. He looked at the ATM photo. 12 million, the judge whispered. It was not a question. It was a realization of the scale of the theft. She has been siphoning the estate dry for 5 years, I said. BioLife is a lie. The warehouse is a lie. The cars are a lie. They are all just different pipes leading to the same sewer in the Cayman Islands. Judge Harris turned to the court clerk. Ms. Robinson, he said, his voice sharp and commanding. Get the Financial Crimes Division of the District Attorney's Office on the line. Now, tell them I need a forensic unit here immediately. Tell them we have a probable cause for grand larceny and international wire fraud in progress. The clerk nodded frantically and grabbed the phone. At the plaintiff's table, the sound of the judge's order seemed to physically hit Victoria. Her hand, which had been clutching a glass of water, spasmed. Crash. The glass hit the table, shattering into a dozen pieces. Water soaked into the expensive tablecloth, spreading like a dark stain toward the legal briefs. Victoria jumped back, staring at the broken glass as if she didn't understand how it had happened. It's not, she stammered. Her voice was thin, reedy. It's my money. I earned it. I took care of him. I took care of Robert. I deserve it. You stole it, I said, my voice cold. You didn't earn a dime. You stole from a dead man and you blamed his daughter. Sterling stood up abruptly. He grabbed his briefcase. His face was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice cracking. In light of this new evidence, I must request to withdraw as counsel. I cannot be a party to this. I was not informed. I have ethical obligations. He was trying to run. He was trying to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of his client's crimes. Judge Harris looked at him. The look was withering. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the judge ordered. But, Your Honor, the rules of professional conduct— I said sit down, Judge Harris roared. The sound slammed into the walls of the courtroom. You brought this petition. You stood in my courtroom and vouched for this woman's integrity. You accused this young woman of insanity to cover up a felony. You are not going anywhere. You will stay in that chair until the federal marshals arrive, the judge said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. And if you try to leave, I will hold you in contempt and throw you in a cell right next to your client. Sterling sank back into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He moved his chair slightly away from Victoria, leaving a distinct gap between them. Victoria looked at him. Arthur? She whispered. Arthur, do something. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, focusing on the seal of the state on the wall, praying for salvation that wasn't coming. Victoria was alone. The wall of lawyers was gone. The pretense of the grieving widow was gone. She was just a thief in a wetsuit, standing in the wreckage of her own greed. But why now? Judge Harris asked, turning his attention back to me. Ms. Whitby, if this has been going on for 5 years, why the sudden emergency petition? Why did she drag you here today? Because of next Tuesday, I said. I picked up the final piece of paper from folder number 5. Next Tuesday, April 15th, is the deadline for the 5-year mandatory IRS audit of the charitable foundation, I explained. And next Wednesday is the scheduled external review of the estate trust by the bank's compliance officers. I looked at Victoria. She ran out of time, I said. She managed to juggle the books for years, moving money from one hole to plug another, but the music stopped. The 12 million is in the Caymans, and the estate accounts are empty. When the auditors look at the books next week, they are going to see a black hole. So she needed a scapegoat, the judge concluded. She needed control, I corrected. If she got the conservatorship today, she would have legal authority over my signature. She could sign a waiver delaying the audit. She could claim the missing funds were misplaced by her mentally unstable stepdaughter. She could fire the compliance officers. She needed my legal death to keep her financial life alive. She didn't come here to save the estate, I said. She came here to bury the evidence, and she planned to bury me along with it. Victoria was sobbing now. It wasn't the delicate, performative crying of the morning. It was ugly, guttural gasping. She was hyperventilating. The reality of the situation was crushing her. The water from the spilled glass dripped steadily onto the floor. Drip, drip, drip. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said. "Is this true? Is the audit scheduled for next Tuesday?" Victoria couldn't speak. She just shook her head back and forth, a meaningless gesture of denial. "The silence speaks volumes," Judge Harris said. He looked at the clerk. "Is the DA on the line?" "They are 5 minutes out, Your Honor." The clerk replied, "They are sending the Economic Crimes Task Force." Judge Harris nodded. He looked at the inventory list one last time. "We have one item left," the judge said. "Item 6, contents of safe deposit box 404 at Central Bank." Victoria's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. The sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She had forgotten about the box. In the chaos of the bank accounts and the cars and the Cayman millions, she had forgotten the one thing she had wanted most of all. "No," she whispered. "No, not the box. You can't open the box." "Oh, we are going to open the box," I said. "In fact, I insist on it." I placed my hand on the final folder in my briefcase. It was sealed with red wax. "Because while everything else on that list was about money," I said, "the box is about something much worse." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "your client seems distressed about item 6. Perhaps you should ask her why." Sterling didn't move. He didn't ask. He just closed his eyes, resigning himself to the final impact. "Read it, Deputy," the judge ordered. Deputy Miller looked at the wet stain on the table, then at the terrified woman, then at me. He took a deep breath. "Item 6, Deputy Miller read, his voice heavy with the fatigue of a man who had seen too much truth in one morning. "Contents of safe deposit box number 404, located at Central Bank, main branch." The mention of the box seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. For the last hour, Victoria had been a cornered animal, lashing out with lies about cars and warehouses, but this was different. When Miller said the number 404, Victoria did not flinch. She leaned forward. Her eyes, red-rimmed and desperate, locked onto the inventory list with a terrifying intensity. She looked like a starving woman who had just been promised a feast. "This item," Victoria interrupted, her voice gaining a sudden, jagged strength. "This is the most important one. Your Honor, the rest might be complicated. There might be accounting errors. But this box proves everything." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She stole my jewelry," Victoria declared. The tears starting again, though they looked more like tears of relief than sorrow. "My late mother's antique emeralds, my diamond engagement ring. She took them all the day after the funeral. I know she hid them in that box. I want it opened. I want the court to see that she is a thief." Judge Harris looked at me. "Ms. Whitby, do you have possession of the key to safe deposit box 404? I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table, resting on top of the red wax-sealed envelope I had saved for this exact moment. "I do, Your Honor," I said softly. "And do you deny that the box contains Mrs. Vance's property?" the judge asked. I turned my head slowly to look at Victoria. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. She wasn't looking at me with hatred anymore. She was looking at me with triumph. She believed she had won. She believed that inside that box was the one thing that could destroy her, the black ledger where she recorded her illegal kickbacks, and by claiming the box as stolen property, she would get custody of it. She would get the key. She would open it, take the ledger, and burn it. She thought she had outsmarted me. "I deny that it contains her jewelry," I said, my voice calm. "But I do not deny that it contains something she is very, very interested in." I looked Victoria dead in the eye. "Are you sure you want to know what is in there, Victoria?" I asked. "Are you absolutely certain you want the judge to open that door? Or do you just want the key so you can destroy whatever you find?" "It's mine!" Victoria shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "Stop playing games. It's my jewelry. Open it. I demand you open it." "Very well," I said. "But before we open it, we should establish a timeline." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my briefcase. "Mrs. Vance claims I accessed this box 6 months ago to hide stolen goods," I said to the judge. "But this is the access log from Central Bank, certified by the vault manager this morning." I held the document up. "The last time safe deposit box 404 was opened was 10 years ago," I said. "February 2nd, 10 years ago, long before Mrs. Vance married my father, long before she ever set foot in our house." Victoria froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The logic in her brain was misfiring. If I hadn't opened it in 10 years, then the black ledger wasn't in there. If the ledger wasn't in there, then what was? 10 years, I repeated. My father rented this box on the day he was diagnosed with his first heart condition. He placed a single sealed package inside, and he gave the bank strict instructions. I handed a copy of the bank's instruction card to the judge. It was to remain sealed until one of 2 conditions was met, I recited. Condition 1, I turn 30 years old. Condition 2, a court of law orders the box opened as part of a dispute regarding his estate. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle on Victoria's shoulders. "You see, Victoria," I said gently, "I knew you were looking for your ledger. I knew you were tearing the house apart looking for the notebook where you kept track of your money laundering with Cousin Vinny. So I let a little secret slip. I told the maid, the one I knew was reporting back to you, that I had hidden the evidence in box 404. Victoria's face turned the color of old ash. She realized, in that split second, that she had been herded. She had been guided, step by greedy step, to this precipice. "I baited the hook," I said. "And you swallowed it whole. You put box 404 on your inventory list. You demanded the court seize it. You demanded the court open it. You fulfilled my father's second condition." "No," Victoria whispered. "No, I withdraw it. I withdraw the item. Take it off the list." "It is too late for that, Mrs. Vance," Judge Harris said, his voice grim. "You have asserted under oath that this box contains stolen property. The court must verify the contents." "Please," Victoria begged, looking at Sterling. But Sterling was staring at the floor, looking like a man awaiting a firing squad. "Please, don't. I took the liberty of executing the court order this morning," I said. "Since the plaintiff filed the motion to seize the box, the bank released the contents to me as the named beneficiary, provided I brought them directly to this courtroom." I picked up the red-sealed envelope. It was yellowed with age. The wax cracked and brittle. "This is not jewelry," I said. "This is a voice from the grave." I stood up and walked to the bench. I placed the envelope in front of Judge Harris. "My father knew," I said, my voice trembling slightly for the first time. 10 years ago. He didn't know you, Victoria, but he knew that one day someone might try to take what he built. He knew that one day I might be standing alone in a room full of sharks. So he left me a weapon." Judge Harris picked up a letter opener. The sound of the blade slicing through the heavy paper was sharp and final. "Rip." He pulled out a thick stack of documents. He began to read. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Victoria was gripping the edge of her table, her knuckles white, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She looked like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. And then, the judge looked up. His face was pale. He looked at Victoria with an expression of pure revulsion. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "This is the last will and testament of Robert Whitby, dated 10 years ago. It supersedes the will you probated 6 months ago." "That's impossible," Victoria stammered. "He wrote a new one. He left everything to me." "Did he?" I asked. "Or did you write a new one and forge his signature with the same auto pen you used for the warehouse documents?" But the will is the least of your problems. The judge interrupted. He held up a second document from the envelope. It was a report from a private investigator, dated 10 years ago. It seems Mr. Whitby was aware of your career long before he married you, the judge said. This is a background check. It details your previous 3 marriages. It details the suspicious deaths of your previous 2 husbands. Victoria let out a strangled cry. He knew, she whispered. He knew and he still married me? He married you because he was lonely, I said. But he protected me because he wasn't stupid. And this, the judge said, holding up a small plastic bag containing a receipt and a printout. This is dated only 6 months ago. It seems Mr. Whitby added to this box shortly before he died. He visited the bank one last time. I hadn't known about this part. I looked at the bag closely. It is a printout of a search history from your iPad. Mrs. Vance, the judge said. Searches for undetectable poisons, symptoms of arsenic poisoning, how to induce a heart attack. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the table. My father hadn't just died. He had been murdered. Or at least, she had tried. He knew, the judge said, reading a handwritten note attached to the printout. If I die suddenly, check her purse. She has been putting powder in my tea. I don't think she has the courage to finish it, but if she does, let this be the proof. I didn't, Victoria screamed, standing up and knocking her chair over. I didn't do it. He had a bad heart. It was natural. I never gave it to him. I only thought about it. You only thought about it? I asked, my voice rising. You searched for it. You bought it. And then he died. And now you are standing here, demanding the box that proves you wanted him dead. I thought it was the ledger, Victoria wailed, collapsing onto the floor, her Armani suit pooling around her like a shroud. I just wanted the ledger. I didn't know he kept the will. I didn't know. She was confessing. In her panic, in her total breakdown, she was confessing to everything. She was admitting she had a black ledger. She was admitting she forged the will. She was admitting she planned to kill him. The trap hadn't just caught a thief. It had caught a killer. You wanted the box, I said, looking down at her sobbing form. You fought for the box. You lied for the box. Well, Victoria, you have it. You have exactly what you asked for. Judge Harris stood up. He didn't look like a judge anymore. He looked like an executioner. Bailiff, he roared. Seal this courtroom. No one leaves, including counsel. Sterling had his head on the table. He wasn't moving. Victoria lay on the floor, sobbing into the carpet, broken by the weight of her own greed. She had walked into that courtroom believing she was the predator. She had demanded the one thing she thought would save her. And instead, she had handed the court the key to her own cell. I looked at the empty envelope on the judge's bench. Box 404. Error 404. File not found. But we had found it. We had found the truth. And it was sharper than any knife she could have put in my back. The sound of the gavel striking the mahogany block was not a tap. It was a gunshot. It cracked through the stale air of the courtroom, shattering the last remnants of the civil proceeding and signaling the violent birth of a criminal one. The echo seemed to bounce off the walls, ringing in my ears like the bell at the end of a boxing match where only one fighter is left standing. Judge Harris did not sit back down. He remained standing, his black robe billowing slightly as he leaned over the high bench. His face, previously etched with the weariness of a man listening to petty family squabbles, was now set in stone. He looked like a statue of judgment brought to life by pure indignation. "Order!" he barked, though the room was already deathly silent. "Complete order in this court." He looked down at Victoria, who was still crumpled on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her own confession. Then he looked at Arthur Sterling, who was trying to make himself as small as possible in his leather chair. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented in this courtroom over the last 2 hours, Judge Harris declared, his voice booming without the need for a microphone, and specifically based on the admission of guilt regarding the forgery of the last will and testament of Robert Whitby. I am vacating the petition for conservatorship effective immediately." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "Furthermore," he continued, the tempo of his speech accelerating, "I am making a judicial finding that there is probable cause to believe that a massive, coordinated scheme of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and perjury has been committed within the jurisdiction of this court. The plaintiff, Victoria Vance, has not only wasted the court's time, she has attempted to weaponize the judicial process to cover up felony crimes." Victoria let out a low moan, trying to push herself up from the carpet. She looked like a broken doll, her hair matted with sweat, her mascara running in dark streaks down her pale cheeks. "I didn't," she whimpered. "I didn't mean to." "Silence," the judge roared. "You have lost the right to speak. Mrs. Vance, you have lost the right to be heard as a litigant. You are now a suspect in a criminal inquiry." He turned to the court clerk, his commands flying like shrapnel. "Ms. Robinson, issue an immediate bench order freezing all assets titled to Victoria Vance, V Victory Corporation, and BioLife Solutions. I want a writ of attachment on every bank account, every real estate holding, and every vehicle associated with her Social Security number. Nothing moves, not a dime, not a penny. If she tries to buy a pack of gum, I want the card to decline." "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk said, her fingers flying across her keyboard, typing the order that would strip my stepmother of her power. "And issue a travel ban," Judge Harris added. "Flag her passport with the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security. Notify the Port Authority and all regional airports. If she tries to cross a border, I want her detained on site." Victoria scrambled to her feet, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She looked at the door. The exit was only 30 feet away. The heavy wooden double doors with the brass handles. Beyond them lay the hallway, the elevator, the street, and perhaps a taxi to the airport before the order hit the system. She took a step. "I need to leave," she gasped, clutching her purse. "I'm feeling unwell. I have a medical condition. I need to go to my doctor." She took another step, faster this time. "Stop right there," the judge ordered. Victoria ignored him. She lunged for the aisle, but Deputy Miller was already moving. The man who had spent the morning reading lists in a monotone drone, the man who looked like he was counting the minutes until retirement, had vanished. In his place was an officer of the court. He moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, stepping out from his station and planting himself squarely in the center of the aisle. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his hand resting casually but firmly on his belt, just inches from his taser. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He was a wall of gray uniform and authority. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "You are not leaving this room." Victoria skidded to a halt 3 feet in front of him. She looked up at his face, searching for the bored bureaucrat she had ignored earlier, but she found only stone. "Move," she hissed, a flash of her old arrogance surfacing through the panic. "Do you know who I am? My husband was Robert Whitby. I pay your salary. Move out of my way." "Your husband is dead, ma'am," Miller said coldly. "And you are currently under the jurisdiction of the court. Step back." Victoria looked at the gap between Miller's arm and the wall. She tensed, thinking about making a run for it. Miller shifted his weight, blocking the angle. It was over. The physical reality of her confinement had just set in. She spun around, her eyes wild, looking for a target. She saw me. I was still sitting at my table. I hadn't moved. I hadn't stood up. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the scene unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. I watched the adrenaline flood her system. I watched the cortisol spike. I watched the fight-or-flight response trigger, and since flight was blocked by Deputy Miller, she chose fight. "You!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Spittle flew from her lips. "This is your fault! You did this! You planned this! You ungrateful little brat!" She started to march toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the floor. "I took you in!" she shrieked. "I gave you a home. I tolerated your moods. And this is how you repay me? By hacking my phone? By digging up old dirt? You ruined everything. I was going to save this family." She was 10 feet away, 8 feet. "You think you're so smart," she yelled, her voice cracking into hysteria. "You think you've won? You haven't won anything. The money is gone. It's all gone. I spent it. I burned it. You'll get nothing. Just a pile of ash." She lunged at my table, grabbing the stack of documents, the evidence of her crimes, and sweeping them onto the floor in a violent tantrum. Papers flew everywhere like confetti. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrorized my teenage years, the woman who had made me feel small and powerless in my own home, and I saw nothing, no fear, no anger, just a pathetic creature who had mistaken money for power and lies for intelligence. "You are making a mess, Victoria," I said quietly. My calmness broke her. She let out a guttural scream of frustration and turned on her own lawyers. "Do something!" she yelled at Arthur Sterling. "Why are you sitting there? Fix this. Object. Call the governor. Call someone. What am I paying you for?" Sterling was frantically shoving papers into his briefcase. He wasn't listening to her. He was in survival mode. He snapped the latches shut and stood up, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "I am terminating my representation," Sterling announced to the room, his voice shaky. "Effective immediately, I am leaving." He signaled to his team of junior associates, who were all looking pale and terrified. "Let's go, now." They started to shuffle toward the side exit, the door reserved for court personnel. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harris shouted. Sterling froze, his hand on the doorknob. "I told you once," the judge said, his voice dangerously low. "You are not going anywhere." "Your Honor, I have a conflict of interest," Sterling pleaded, sweat dripping down his nose. "I cannot represent a client who has perjured herself. I must withdraw." "You can withdraw as counsel," Judge Harris said, "but you will remain as a witness, and potentially as a co-conspirator. You signed the pleadings, you vouched for the evidence, you submitted the false inventory. Until I determine how much you knew and when you knew it, you are in my custody." "Bailiff," the judge ordered, "take their bar cards, all of them. Mr. Sterling and his associates are to surrender their licenses to practice law to the court clerk immediately. They are suspended pending a review by the State Ethics Board." Sterling looked at the door. He looked at the judge. He looked at his career, dissolving in real time, slowly, painfully. He reached into his wallet and pulled out his laminated bar association card. He placed it on the table. It was the white flag of surrender. Victoria watched her last line of defense crumble. She was alone in the center of the room. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, and then the phone on the judge's bench rang. It was a sharp, digital trill. The judge picked it up instantly. "Harris," he said. He listened for a moment. "Yes, she is here. The courtroom is secured. I have the evidence impounded. Yes, bring them in." He hung up the phone. He looked at Victoria. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "your ride is here." The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were thrown open. 4 men and 2 women walked in. They were not wearing the standard uniforms of the court bailiffs. They wore dark blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back and badges on their belts. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that made the lawyers look like amateurs. The lead officer was a woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a tight bun. She held a warrant in her hand. "Economic Crimes Unit," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "We are looking for Victoria Vance." Judge Harris pointed a finger at the woman standing amidst the scattered papers. "She is all yours, Lieutenant." The lieutenant walked down the aisle. Her team fanned out, securing the perimeter, blocking the exits, and standing over the cowering legal team. Victoria stepped back. She bumped into the defense table. There was nowhere left to go. "No," she whispered. "You can't. This is a civil court. You can't arrest me here." Victoria Vance, the lieutenant said, ignoring the protest and continuing to close the distance. I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the district attorney's office. On what charges? Victoria demanded, trying to summon one last shred of dignity, straightening her jacket. I want to see the warrant. Take your pick, the lieutenant said, stopping 2 feet from her. Grand larceny, wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, forgery of a legal instrument, money laundering, and attempted murder. Victoria flinched at the last one. You have the right to remain silent, the lieutenant recited, reaching for her belt, and I strongly suggest you start using it right now. I am a wealthy woman, Victoria shouted, flailing her arms as the lieutenant reached for her. I have rights. I demand to speak to the press. This is a conspiracy. The lieutenant didn't argue. She grabbed Victoria's left wrist. She spun her around with a practiced, forceful motion. Victoria screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure indignation. Get your hands off me! These are silk! You're ruining my suit! Click. The sound of the first cuff locking into place was louder than the scream. It was a mechanical, final sound. The lieutenant grabbed the other wrist. Victoria resisted, pulling away, her diamonds flashing under the fluorescent lights. But she was no match for a trained officer. The lieutenant yanked her arm back. Click. Victoria Vance, the Queen of Oakhaven Society, the grieving widow, the woman who had demanded everything, was now in steel bracelets. The lieutenant checked the fit of the cuffs. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one will be provided for you. Although, she glanced at Sterling, who was staring at his shoes. I think your current one is busy. Victoria looked down at her wrists. She looked at the handcuffs cutting into her skin. She looked at the diamond bracelet trapped underneath the steel. The contrast was brutal. The symbol of her wealth was now pinned beneath the symbol of her downfall. She looked up at me. Her eyes were no longer angry. They were empty. The fire was gone. The greed was gone. There was only the hollow realization that the game was over. I looked back at her. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just watched. I watched the officer recite the rest of the Miranda rights. I watched the other officers begin to collect the scattered evidence from the floor. I watched Deputy Miller open the gate to let them lead her out. She was just a specimen now, a problem that had been solved, an equation that had been balanced. Take her away, Judge Harris ordered, sitting back down in his chair and picking up his pen. And someone get a broom. This courtroom is a mess. The police marched her out. She didn't walk with the head-high strut she had entered with. She was dragged, stumbling, her head bowed, her expensive shoes scuffing against the linoleum, as the doors closed behind her, cutting off her final sob. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was a clean silence. The air felt lighter. The smell of floor wax returned, but the smell of rot was gone. Judge Harris looked at me. Ms. Whitby, he said. Yes, Your Honor? We are not done yet, he said. We still have to formally dismiss the case and execute the transfer of assets back to the estate. But for now, take a breath. I took a breath. It was the first deep breath I had taken in 5 years. The police were gone. The criminal was in chains. The lawyers were disbarred. And I was still sitting at the table, my grandfather's briefcase in front of me. The sole survivor of the war, Victoria Vance, had started. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut with a resounding thud, cutting off the last desperate wail of Victoria Vance, for a moment. Her voice lingered in the hallway, a chaotic mix of obscenities and pleas that bounced off the marble walls until it was swallowed by the elevator. Then, there was silence. It was not the tense, suffocating silence that had filled the room for the last 2 hours. It was a clean silence. It was the sound of a storm finally breaking, leaving the air scrubbed and still. I sat there for a moment, listening to the absence of her. For 5 years, her voice had been the soundtrack to my nightmares. It had been the sharp, critical drone in my ear, telling me I was worthless, telling me I was unstable, telling me I was nothing without my father. Now, That voice was gone, locked in the back of a squad car, heading toward a booking photo and a concrete cell. Judge Harris exhaled a long, slow breath. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Looking suddenly older than he had 10 minutes ago, he picked up his gavel, not to strike it, but just to hold it, feeling the weight of the law in his hand. Then he looked at me. His eyes, which had been hard as flint when looking at Victoria, softened. There was no pity in them anymore. There was respect. "Ms. Whitby," the judge said, his voice quiet but clear in the empty room. "Please stand." I stood up. My legs felt steady. The trembling I had expected never came. "The court officially dismisses the plaintiff's petition for emergency asset conservatorship with prejudice," Judge Harris stated. "That means she can never file this claim against you again. It is dead. But we are going to go a step further." He picked up a pen and began to sign the stack of orders the clerk had prepared. The scratch of the pen on paper was a rhythmic, soothing sound. "Based on the discovery of the original last will and testament in Box 404, the judge continued, "and the clear evidence of fraud regarding the subsequent documents, I am issuing an immediate order of reverse transfer. The probate of the previous will is vacated. The court recognizes the 10-year-old document as the true and binding intent of Robert Whitby." He looked up, meeting my gaze. "Effective this second, you are the sole executor and beneficiary of the Whitby estate. You have 100% controlling interest in the family company. You have full authority over the charitable foundation, and you have immediate possession of all real estate and liquid assets, including those currently frozen in the Cayman Islands pending their repatriation by the federal authorities." He handed the signed order to the clerk, who stamped it with a heavy, satisfying thunk. "You have your life back, Eleanor," the judge said, "and you have your father's legacy back. Do not let her shadow touch it ever again." "I won't, Your Honor," I said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Judge Harris said, a small, weary smile touching his lips. "You did the work. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen many people try to fight their way out of a corner, but I have never seen anyone dismantle a trap by walking straight into it and waiting for the hunter to snap the jaws on their own hand." He gathered his robe and stepped down from the bench. "Go home, Ms. Whitby. It is over." He disappeared into his chambers. The clerk finished packing up her files and gave me a quick, shy nod before hurrying out the side door. I was alone with Deputy Miller. The bailiff was standing by the empty defense table, looking at the mess of papers Victoria had swept onto the floor. He bent down, his knees popping slightly, and picked up the photo of the ruined warehouse. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table. I began to pack up. I took the folder with the bank records. I took the folder with the auto pen signature. I took the red wax envelope that had saved my life. I placed them one by one into my grandfather's beaten leather briefcase. Each item was a piece of the war I had just won. But I didn't want to keep them as trophies. I just wanted them put away. I clicked the brass latches shut. Click, click. "You know," Deputy Miller said, his voice rumbling like gravel in a mixer, "I thought you were crazy when you walked in here this morning. No lawyer, old briefcase, sitting there like a statue while they threw mud at you." I looked up at him. He was leaning against the railing, his arms crossed. "I had to be quiet," I said. "If I had interrupted her, she might have stopped lying." Miller chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "That list," he said, shaking his head. "The inventory. You made her demand it. You made her stand there and claim every single crime as her property. I have seen criminals confess in the interrogation room. I have seen them crack on the stand, but I have never seen someone hand the executioner the rope and demand he tie the knot." She was greedy. "Deputy," I said, picking up the briefcase. "Greed is a form of blindness. She saw the assets. She didn't see the evidence attached to them. She thought she was listing her winnings. I knew she was listing her indictments." Miller walked over to the gate and swung it open for me. "Well," he said, "she will have plenty of time to read that list now. Federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud and attempted murder aren't light. She isn't going to Aspen anymore. She is going to a place where the only jewelry she gets is steel. He tipped his head slightly. Good luck, Ms. Whitby. Drive safe. Thank you. Mr. Miller, I said. I walked down the aisle. The carpet, which had felt like a mile-long gauntlet when I entered, now felt like nothing at all beneath my feet. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the hallway. The courthouse lobby was busy. Lawyers were rushing to hearings, clients were pacing nervously, and security guards were checking bags. No one looked at me. No one knew that in courtroom 4B, a dynasty had just fallen and a new one had risen. I was just a woman in a navy dress with an old briefcase, walking toward the exit. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out onto the wide stone steps. It was raining. It was a light, misty rain, the kind that smells of wet pavement and ozone. The sky was a soft, bruised gray. I stopped on the top step and closed my eyes, letting the cool mist hit my face. It felt like a baptism. It washed away the smell of the courtroom, the smell of Victoria's perfume, the smell of stale lies and fear. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the damp, clean air. I didn't turn around to look at the courthouse. I didn't flip a middle finger at the building. I didn't scream a cry of victory. That was what Victoria would have done. She lived for the drama, for the performance. My victory was quiet. My victory was the fact that I could walk down these steps and never have to think about her again. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to torture her. I just wanted her gone. And she was gone. I had used the law like a scalpel, excising a tumor from my life with precision. She wasn't my stepmother anymore. She wasn't my tormentor. She was just a case number in the federal system. She was a ghost. I walked down the steps to the curb. Cars were splashing by on the wet street, their tires hissing on the asphalt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single, short vibration. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the bank, my real bank, the one I had opened last week in anticipation of this moment. Alert. Account status updated. I tapped the screen. Estate trust accounts. Unfrozen. Access granted. Balance. Transfer pending. Then a second notification popped up. Vance Asset Seizure Protocol. Initiated. Status. Processing. I watched the words on the screen. The millions she had stolen. The millions she had hidden. The house. The cars. The fake company. It was all coming back. It was all flowing back to where it belonged. The numbers were just pixels on a screen. But they represented freedom. They represented the ability to rebuild the community center she had let rot. They represented the ability to fund the research grants she had faked. They represented my father's name, scrubbed clean of her stain. I put the phone back in my pocket. I didn't need to stare at it. I knew it was real. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, its wipers slapping back and forth. The driver leaned over and rolled down the window. "Where to, lady?" he asked. I opened the back door and slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. It smelled of pine air freshener and old coffee. It was the best smell in the world. I placed the briefcase on the seat next to me. I looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets of Oakhaven. I had lived here my whole life. I had lived in the shadow of my father, and then in the shadow of Victoria. "Where to?" the driver asked again. Impatient. I smiled. It was a real smile this time, one that reached my eyes. 312 River Road, I said. "River Road?" the driver said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "That's the old boathouse district. Nothing much out there but empty lofts." "Not anymore," I said. "It is my new office and my new home." It was a place I had bought 6 months ago under a trust name, a place Victoria didn't know existed, a place with big windows and no memories, a place where I would start Apex Logic for real, where I would build the things my father had dreamed of. "All right," the driver said, punching the meter. "River Road it is." He pulled the car into gear. The taxi merged into the traffic, moving away from the courthouse, away from the past, accelerating toward the gray horizon. I watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror, shrinking until it was just a speck of stone in the rain. Then we turned a corner, and it was gone. I sat back and watched the city fly by. The rain was stopping. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a sliver of pale, clean blue. The taxi door had closed on the old Eleanor Whitby. The woman in the back seat was someone entirely new, and for the first time in 10 years, the road ahead was wide open. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of justice and resilience. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment below and let me know which country or city you are listening in. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge, please subscribe to the channel Blue Payback, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people around the world. Your support means everything. Stay safe and see you in the next story.